This edition of MacVoices is supported by you, our viewers and listeners, through our new Patreon campaign. If you get value from MacVoices, please consider helping support the show by visiting patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we should tell you right up front that this is a little bit of an experimental show. We're trying a Facebook Live broadcast as well as recording the show for distribution later via podcast and all of our other channels. So we're not quite sure what kind of results we're going to get on the back end. So if this looks a little bit different, it probably is because it is different. So bear with us. And also, please feel free to give me some feedback on what you think. Is this good? Is this bad? Do you like listening in on the MacVoices interviews? Or would you rather just get them in the podcast feed and post it to the normal channels? With that, I want to introduce my first guest, Mr. Mark Fuccio. Mark has been here plenty of times. Mark, great to see you as always.
Hi, Chuck. Thanks for the invitation to participate in this experiment.
Yeah, well, this is an experiment, but also we're not just podcasting for the sake of podcasting. You and I have a habit of trading tweets and emails about little bits and pieces we see in the news. And pretty soon we're into a deep, dark conversation and we say, hey, we should be talking about this on the show. So
that's what happened here.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened here. Because I think, Mark, you really want to be an analyst. I think that's what your deep desire is.
Be careful. There's all sorts of analysts, and that could be a nice thing or that could be a bad thing to say to somebody. But I tend to when I read something, I tend to dig in to form my own opinion of do I believe it? If there's a conclusion made, does it follow and is it justified by the facts, or is it just an opinion? And everybody has opinions.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yours usually, you start out with a premise, but you're not afraid to reverse your decision based on what you uncover. So I really like and respect that about you, because during those conversations, I inevitably learn things. So I think this may have started. I'm not sure if this started with the publication or speculation on the iPhone 10 sales or the Apple Music subscriptions. So I'll let you take either one and run with it.
I think they may have all come together at around the same time. Just about a month ago, Apple, had their quarterly results, and I was reading them, and I was at my auto mechanic. Just popped in to have an oil change, and had a little spare time there. So I set about trying to answer the question for myself of what percent of sales were attributable to the iPhone 10. And as we know, Apple just discloses the total units sold and total revenue. So that I think, and knowledge of historicals allowed me to make a calculation. Historically, the average selling price has been fairly constant. So it goes up and down a little bit, a couple dollars per quarter. This time it went up $97. So that's fairly dramatic. So based on the assumption that increase was solely due to sales of iPhone 10, it was possible to develop two equations and two unknowns. This is sort of harkens back to high school algebra. And one of the key assumptions I made was that the increase in average selling price is solely attributable due to the iPhone 10. And there's two models, 64K and 256K, selling at $999 and $1149. So it's impossible to, without knowing the exact mix, of iPhone 10 in the memory models, but it's possible to establish a range for roughly how many were sold. So if you assume that 50-50 mix of 256 and 64 gigabytes were sold, then sort of the blended ASP of the iPhones would be $1,119. So, you combine that, with the, the total of the iPhone 10 and all the other iPhone units having to sum to 77,316,000, which is the total number Apple sold. You're able to get two equations and two unknowns. one search engine, that's great for doing sort of technical calculations and is Wolfram Alpha. If you enter this in there as an equation, it comes back and spits out numbers. So on the assumption that iPhone 10 sold in roughly 50-50 proportions, the result is 19,999,000.1 100,000, 10,000 units were sold of the iPhone 10. So that's roughly 20%. If you assume that maybe 20% bought the 64K and 80% bought the 256K, I assume this is probably more like it, because I think these are the Apple really fanatics, and those are people who know you always get as much memory as you can. If you look at it that way, you get about 17.9 million iPhone 10s that were sold, and this is calculated using Apple financial disclosures. Some of the analysts out there, I think, one thing said, Apple sold 27 million. Don't know where the analyst got that. If it's a number just picked out of thin air, or if they were pouring drinks down somebody in the supply chain in the bar, or if they just threw numbers at a dartboard. But I can't see any basis to get anything that high. So that was sort of what got me thinking a little bit about some of the iPhone calculations. Comments or questions?
Yeah, I find this particularly interesting because as we record this, either yesterday or today, it came out that someone had done, and I'm sorry, I don't recall exactly who, but someone had done a survey, and one of the reasons that the iPhone 10 didn't sell better, they were trying to determine why the iPhone 10 didn't sell better. And surprise, surprise, number one was the cost. Number two was the fact that some people wanted a larger phone than the iPhone 10. Okay, I can understand the second one. If you were absolutely a lover of the big phone, then this would have been a little bit of a disappointment. The price, well, that's no surprise because people were railing about that from the day it was announced. But I guess I think there's a little bit of amnesia going on here, because the iPhone 8 was supposed to be, as I recall, sort of the mainstream iPhone for the upgrade path. The iPhone 10 was allegedly an experiment. It was packing some of the newest tech that wasn't necessarily fully tested.
Get the future now at a high price point.
Exactly. And suddenly, somewhere along the way, that just morphed into, this is the top end of the line. Now, I realize price-wise, it definitely is the top end of the line. But I just am kind of struggling with the idea that, of the way that this whole thing was handled. It just, I don't know, it just seems like the iPhone 10 is what it is and what it should be. And that's it.
So when thinking about surveys, you really have to be very careful and really ultimately need to look at what is the exact survey and what is the language, because it's very easy to bias things just by the way questions are phrased. I've done a lot of research work, and using surveys, they're really great if you have a very large audience, because you can see things and you can see trends and identify different segments. The problem with it is that when it comes to measuring things like intent to purchase, this is very, very, very difficult. Especially, we all know that from negotiation that saying, "Oh, the price is too high," that's a simple, unequivocal answer of why somebody didn't purchase. And is it true? It could be. It could not be. I mean, we all see sales situations where price is important, but it's solely the single determining factor to whether a sale gets made or not. So there are more elaborate techniques that are much more expensive, and I doubt it was one of the normal suspects that did the research. Was it Gene Munster's old company, whoever they are? I suspect that it's probably something they cooked up and slammed out to whatever, who knows what sort of audience, because that's a very important characteristic, and who knows how the survey was constructed. So all we can say is people thought, yes, it was expensive, but I think that's part of this larger debate about the iPhone, the upgrade, the super cycle that never seems to have materialized. And I think there's a lot of speculation, and unfortunately, a problem that a lot of established market analysts have is they have an opinion and they get married to it. Somebody said in the stock world, there's only one sin greater than making a prediction, and that is getting married to it.
Yeah. And it does seem like that's what happens in this case so often, is these guys fall in love with their theories and doing their best to sort of justify those theories no matter what the facts are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know we pick on analysts a lot. I think every Mac show does, because sometimes they seem to be spot on and really understand the way we as Apple enthusiasts understand Apple. And other times they just miss the mark so much it's scary. And then there are other times they just seem to pull it right out of thin air. So,
but again, the thing about being an analyst is it's a hard job, especially because many of them, they're trying to predict the future. So almost unequivocally, I can say, any analyst you look at, the only thing you know is that his or her prediction is going to be wrong. Because it's very, very difficult to predict the future. One thing investing in the stock market teaches you is you don't have to be right to make money. You don't have to be able to predict, to the penny what a corporation's earnings are. You can look at the broader context in which it is operating. And in fact, there's all sorts of well-known cases of people getting married to an opinion and losing tremendous amounts of money. And you just at some point you need to change your mind. I mean, Steve Jobs was very well known for that, right? He had a number of big U-turns, video on the iPad, iTunes on Windows. When facts and situations change, your opinion needs to change with it.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
One of the other things, as I started out by saying too, was the Apple Music subscriptions and the implications for Spotify. And I wanted to get you to talk just a little bit about that, because I have some strong opinions about that myself.
So that's a really broad bucket and broad topic. I think probably the most interesting thing is that Apple has disclosed 2 data points, once last September, October, and then again, I think on their last earnings call. And, the growth of their numbers from around 30 to 36 million paid subscribers, if I remember them correctly. If you do a little bit of math, that implies that they're growing on the rate of a little under 5% a month. So round it to 5. So that's a very hefty growth rate. One thing we learned is Spotify filed for a public listing, and I'll make sure you have the URL so that they can go in the show notes so that listeners can get access to it if they're so interested. But looking at Spotify, they have 2 sort of businesses. They have an ad business, and then they have paid subscribers. And the paid subscribers, it's confusing because they've gone from individual subscribers at $9.99 a month to a family plan where you can have up to 6 subscribers for $14.99 a month. But if you look at their rate of growth, it's growing on the order of 2% per year. Sorry, 2% per month. So again, if you do a little bit of numbers, Apple's growing 5%, they're 3% a month faster. Look at their current sizes, they'll overtake Spotify in about 2 years, at the current growth rates. We don't know what the impact of things like the HomePod is, and whether we'll see an uptick in growth of Apple Music subscribers, which I think certainly we will. I don't know if it will be permanent or it might be transient just around the release of the HomePod product, but it certainly seems that barring any dramatic change, that Apple's on track for overcoming Spotify.
Yeah, and I'm surprised. And just today, I had an email from a viewer, listener. We were talking about. I was on the Next Track podcast, and
I know it well.
Yeah, with Kirk McElhearn and Doug Adams, and talking about storage, music storage. And he was saying that he has been a Tidal subscriber because he wanted the higher quality music,
Flax,
and has pretty much decided that he doesn't need that now, and is looking at trying out Apple Music, which I thought was very telling. We didn't go too far down that path because we were talking about other things, but I look at that. I look at the HomePod, and I feel like now we have a quality device to listen in our homes to Apple Music, and that's a good thing. Spotify, not quite so much. I mean, I know they are well integrated into the Amazon the A device system.
Yes,
but it's still not quite the same. And of course, I've said this a number of times that I think Amazon really dropped the ball by not partnering with someone to do maybe not a HomePod-like speaker, but definitely something that had a lot more quality to it. Because let's face it, I know some people think the Echoes or the Echo 2 especially is good enough, but it just doesn't hold a candle to the HomePod.
In that regard, Chuck, I think both Apple and Amazon are completely complementary in terms of where their blind spot is. I think for Apple, the motive was to have a high quality sound device, and I think their blind spot, or maybe they got surprised, was it should be a Siri device as well. I think Amazon is the exact opposite. I think they came out wanting to make a device that's intelligent, it's open. They have many developers offering skills for it, and for them, they just weren't thinking about the quality of the sound that it emits.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's pretty good. And it only made sense to use Siri for the HomePod just because that was it worked reasonably well on the iPhone, at least for me. And so, why wouldn't you put it in the speaker? Of course, the challenge is to get it to be heard when your mic is sitting right beside that speaker. And Apple has done an amazing job of that because I can turn my iPad up to top level and have it blasting out whatever and just say, "Hey, S lady," and the music drops down and she's paying attention.
iPad, you mean HomePod? Yes.
HomePod. I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. So I continue to find the HomePod experience just so pleasant, and I'm listening to so much more music because I can do it without any friction and easily. And when somebody calls, the phone rings or something happens, I ask it to pause, and it pauses. No pulling my phone out of my pocket or trying to take my AirPods out or earphones out or whatever. It's just. I know that I'm extremely spoiled, but I like being spoiled.
Yeah, I agree. We did the show 3-4 weeks ago now about experience with HomePod. I agree. It's since then it's even much better. I have much more pleasant experience. Going back to you said after your appearance on the Next Track that one of your listeners or one of their listeners contacted you saying that they're giving up on Tidal. What do you make of that? Is it just sorely because there is a high quality audio is available within the Apple Music library if you're careful in what you select.
Right. I don't know, Mark. I've never understood the appeal of Tidal. For a premium price, I'm getting theoretically better streaming music. But of course, I'm so steeped in the Apple ecosystem, I'm not sure I'm a fair test. But it just, I tried Tidal early on, just to see. Number one, I could not tell the difference. Maybe that's just the nature of what I listened to and what I was listening to it on. But again, and especially now with HomePod, I mean, Tidal is at a decided disadvantage because you have to intend to listen to Tidal.
Yes.
And
yes.
That's, you have to. So if your ears are good enough and it makes a difference to you, by all means, that's fine.
I think this was the thing you and Michael Cohen and I, when we did that show, that we all said, yes, we have the big room with the big speakers and the big amplifier, but you have to go there. It's vaguely or not well integrated into the Apple playback system. So, your word, too much friction. So it's much easier just to tell the HomePod to play something. And a point I made during the show, I'd reemphasize, is that you really can tell the difference between how different albums are mastered. So if maybe that's why that listener was going to Tidal, thinking that maybe they're getting better mastering. It may be, but it's not a guaranteed conclusion. But the way albums are mastered certainly has a way, dramatic impact on your playback and listening experience.
And I still know people that if they're really that serious about it, they will buy their music and rip it to Apple Lossless or FLAC or something like that. And that's, again, that's great. If you have that kind of money, if you have that kind of time, and if you enjoy that process, enjoy the daylights out of it. I would rather be listening to music. And yes, you're right, to go back to that, the Mac jury we did. There was a time I sat down and listened to music, but I don't listen to music anymore. I'm doing other things while I'm listening to music. And that's where the friction part comes in. And so therefore the really nice speakers and the big amp, I'm not going to say they're gathering dust, but yeah, they're pretty much gathering dust,
Yes.
It's so much easier to keep on moving with whatever you have to do. And
so back to,
yeah,
sorry.
No, go right ahead. Yeah. Cause we're going down the HomePod path
okay. So back to Spotify. I've never used it. Have you used their service?
I used Spotify early on before Apple Music, and it was okay.
Were you paid or were you an ad-supported listener?
No, I was paid for a while. And it just, again, you either had to build your playlist or use one of their curated playlists. And I'm sorry, the only curation that I find enjoyable is Pandora. Apple Music, no. Spotify, no. Tidal, no. And that was the reason I think I got away from using it as much as maybe I would have liked to, because I had to be thinking about what I wanted to listen to. And, that sounds, again, like a really spoiled thing, but no, it just, okay, when I wanted to listen to something, great, but otherwise I might pick an artist and hit play, or I might pick an album and hit play and then walk away. And, and now I find myself, because of Apple Music and Siri and HomePod and all, able to bounce around between things a lot more and enjoy a lot more of my library.
Yeah. So on Spotify, they filed, I guess, an F1, which is normally when companies try to go public to file an S1 form. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is for F1, other than basically it's, all of a sudden they're public and they start selling. So they dispense with having an investment bank that goes out and does a roadshow and tries to drum up demand and things. Don't know why they did that. Later on I might, make some speculations, but reading their document, it's very fact intensive and very dense prose until you get to some of the financial tables. If you look at it, they're on the order of a $4 billion company, but they're losing money. They're losing money. And if you look at sort of the gross margin, it's about 10% for the ad supported business and a little under 20, about 18% plus or minus for paying subscriptions. The problem with that is that's barely enough to for a company to live on, and some of the other oddities about their document that stand out is they literally spend more time talking about all the risk factors to their business than they do describing what their business is itself. So, to me, that just is, sort of a really weird, feeling. But I guess we're in such a litigious world, they want to make sure that they've covered absolutely anything. And the other thing I think looking at it is it's a lousy business. It's a really lousy business. They have so much of what they have to pay has to go off to as royalties back to the record companies. And, they have increasing R&D spend. And again, I just know secondhand from people who've used it, but it doesn't seem that, the product per se is maturing. But they talk about all the complexity of, depending on where in the world they are distributing and how it's paid, they have very complex royalty calculations. So it seems that they're just stuck in this world of complexity and just having to spend time just counting beans and counting streams. So to me, it's a mess. And I wouldn't be surprised if if a year from now, if we meet on the anniversary of the show, that I wouldn't be surprised if we find that Spotify no longer exists as an independent company. It's either get acquired or maybe just it's running into the rocks. I just do not get a good feeling out of anything I've read in the document.
Do you think it's any less of a mess for Apple, or do you think it because it's Spotify's only business and Apple Music and the associated aspects of it are just part of the Apple ecosystem?
I don't know what the answer is. I would think that Apple, because they have a much stronger history of selling tracks, that they would have better negotiating leverage. And just face it, every time you get into something really complex, it's the results of a negotiation. It's either Spotify doesn't want to pay what their rate is, so they agree, okay, well, we can do it this way, and if we can grow a certain amount, and if it's to somebody else who's on the family plan, then, we have more money and we'll pay a lower rates. And, so you get all these potentially crazy, complex, compromises. It could be just as bad for Apple, but, I do not think that, let's stipulate it is just as bad for Apple. At that point, it's a cost center inside this other company that has all sorts of ways of generating revenue. And initially, under Steve Jobs' era, they always used to say iTunes, doesn't make a profit. It's there to support sales of, iPods and then later on, iPhones. So it may be possible that they're making no money or almost no money out of music, music streaming. But they still have music sales and they have other services that, are levered by sales of phone, earbuds, now a HomePod, also for all sorts of other devices where Spotify doesn't. And that's why I think I just get a really negative opinion just by reading their filing.
Yeah. Don't forget Beats headphones. And,
yes.
And now allegedly we're going to have
rumor. Yes, new one.
We hate to talk about rumors here, but it seems so pervasive that there will be an Apple branded over-the-ear headphones. So that's just one more thing. But the other part about the whole music thing is Apple likes to control things from top to bottom. And I feel like that's what I see happening here. They had music they had the iPod for a while. Then they added the music store. Then they added streaming music. Then the AirPods came along and sort of addressed that. And they picked up Beats, which addressed a different segment of the market. Now HomePod. Now we have a rumor of Apple branded over-the-ear headphones. And at some point it's like, okay, what's next? But Apple really is potentially controlling my total music experience from what I want to listen to, what I'm going to listen to it on. and what's going to go in my ears or what's going to be playing the music. And I think that overall package is really interesting. It gives them so much power. And for those folks who enjoy the live broadcast, you have Beats One. For those who enjoy having somebody else decide what they're going to listen to, there are plenty of playlists out there. So I can't believe they're doing all this and not making any money at it. It's just, and if that is the case, then they're looking at a bigger picture that maybe we aren't privy to just yet.
So, again, it's very difficult. We know that purportedly Apple was making 30 cents off of every track, so 99 cents, they get 30. That's quite good. For streaming, who knows what the Apple economics are? We hear secondhand about Pandora. We have, real live evidence for Spotify. And it could just be that, you have giant labels, and Spotify started out as a tiny company that they just got a raw deal. And Apple may, because of their size, have a completely better deal. But it seems that the majority of users are the free ad supported users that have 10% gross margin. So that's really horrible. So that's why I say I think they just have an ugly business and ugly financials.
Yeah, but I might say that it's flipped around. That maybe Spotify got a better deal than Apple did simply because everybody's afraid of Apple getting into their business. And so whether they saw that as a way to, use Spotify as a cat's paw to try to push back and make sure that Apple didn't have as much power as they did in streaming as they did in the sales of music.
In sales. That's possible. Don't know.
Yeah.
We need to, take Eddie Q into a bar and pour liquor down his throat until he tells us his story.
Yeah. That probably wouldn't do it, unfortunately. One other thing we talked about pre-show, and just as we both saw today, we don't have a lot of information, but it looks like from the articles I read that iHeartRadio may be in trouble as well with some of their radio stations. And I find this really interesting because up to now, they've been the 300-pound gorilla of streaming terrestrial radio. And if they're in trouble, what does that say about terrestrial radio in an age of streaming music?
So, that's an interesting question. I think probably what it says is, is there that much content out there that people want? Certainly this is what, some of the satellite, radios were doing, and they made these huge deals, to keep Howard Stern and other shows there. But I think the whole thing about podcasting is, somebody said, that's like, time shifting for radio is, there's lots of other content out there. So, again, I really haven't studied, iHeartRadio, but I just don't think that there's all that much content out there that, you could sustain a huge network. I mean, to me, actually, it's really curious to see right now everyone's saying, this is the golden age of podcasting, and everyone is trying to create podcasts. But from things we've discussed over the years, the economics really aren't there, on a large scale, right? People keep talking about they want to trade their paper dollars for digital dimes. And we'll see what happens as this whole media industry evolves. But certainly, people want great content. I hear more and more shows that are trying to support themselves through Patreon donors. Be fascinating to know how that's really working out. But iHeart, again, just it's the whole nature of, our venture capital funded system is, people put big money down on bets and most of them don't work out.
Yeah. Yes. And we're trying to do the same with Patreon. So patreon.com/MacVoices, folks. That's the only commercial we hear this time. but I still, I have to admit, I get in certain friends' cars and there's still a radio on, and sometimes they don't bother. And to me, that's a little bit alien because I feel like I don't have enough.
They don't bother. Sorry, don't bother what?
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Turning it off or tuning it or
tuning it. I mean, they set it on one station and that's it. And they don't bother to take their iPod or their iPhone or, whatever to play podcasts or music that they want to listen to. And I can't decide why there's such a disconnect. Is it just too much trouble for them? And that's where I'm wondering, if as we see CarPlay come into more vehicles and makes it easier for people to say, hey, S-Lady, play this, what that'll do to it. Because it just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't have enough time to listen to all the music I want to, listen to all the podcasts, listen to the audiobooks I'd like to. I mean, there's so much content out there I would like to consume. And just like all of us, we have to ration it one way or another and make selections. And then there's that faction, that section of the audience that just says, yeah, I'll just listen to whatever's on. And
Chuck, I think that's just different habits that different people have. Maybe some of it is there's friction that people just don't know that there are easier ways to do things. But I'm always surprised. People, at the Edison Group, they reported last year for the first time that more than 25% of the population had listened to a podcast. Again, talking about surveys. Well, what does that mean? They listened to a podcast on their own, or did a friend play it for them and sit them down? Did they listen to more than one? So, I still have the general feeling that, podcasts are a minority. I think, YouTube and YouTubers, I think, are greater numbers than podcasters, just because discovery is so much easier.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure we did touch on one other thing that you wanted to talk about and brought up in our conversation, and that's Dropbox.
Yes. So Dropbox also had an S1 filing, and it is it's very different. It tells the story of a company that has grown, and they're about $1 billion in revenue. They're showing a loss for last year. However, you have to be careful. They have it's non-cash losses, and what I mean by that is they had a large award, several $100 million of stock as compensation. So when a company gives out stock, it gets treated as an expense, even though it's a non-cash expense. So if you look at their balance sheet, and if you look at their income statement, if you correct for the non-cash award, you could see that, okay, yes, on a cash basis, they actually did generate cash. So that's positive. If you look over the past couple of years, their cash, the amount that they've generated is getting better on a margin basis. I think a large part of that is, they've made the turn from trying to hit consumers for individual file sync and sharing accounts to targeting a set of services that make them attractive to business. And they're able to get business people, paying. So, it is one of your more classic, venture funded, S1 filings. My general sense is this is interesting. Just watch a year, see what happens, because there's an incredible number of shares that are going to be coming onto the market. And, that has always the potential to drive, more supply. If there's no demand out there, that'll drive the share price down. So, my experience has always been with new IPOs is, watch them, let them age, 5-6 quarters, before you can get a sense of, what the underlying business truly is, because going public is a discretionary event, and every company will put on its best face and tidy up its financials to put the best possible face forward. You need to give it a little bit of time to get an understanding of what the actual business is. So, for them, it's not totally positive. They talk about 500 million subscribers and about 2%, are paying subscribers. I think their challenge is they just have a lot of dead weight. They tried. Their whole story is our market can grow, or we can expand by converting our base account users into paying customers. Well, good luck with that. I think a lot of people are cheap, and they're just never going to buy. So again, it's not an ugly S1 filing, but there's certainly enough risk factors in there that I wouldn't recommend jumping in on the initial day. I'd say just watch it for a year and then see what happens. After 120 days, they're going to have unlock, so the other employees will be able to start to sell. And when Facebook did that, the share price went up because there was obviously more demand out there than there was supply available. Will Dropbox be like that? Let's just watch ahead, watch the game, and see what happens.
I'm hopeful with Dropbox for a couple reasons. First, they were sort of, if they weren't first to the game, they were certainly the one that was the most popular. I mean, so cloud computing almost became for a lot of people synonymous with Dropbox.
With Dropbox, yes.
And my experience with Dropbox has always been good. And I have a personal account, and I'm also involved in a business account with Dropbox. And there's some interface things for the business account that I would like to see changed. But other than that, it does what they say it's going to do, and it works very, very well. Apple decided to get into it with iCloud, and certainly iCloud gives Apple certain opportunities for different things. Honestly, I haven't compared the pricing of the two in so long because I use iCloud for just what Apple wants me to, because I've been a bit ingrained in the Dropbox ecosystem, but I wouldn't be opposed to changing. And inevitably, one of the things everything gets compared to Dropbox, and that included iCloud in the beginning. When, okay, I've got an iCloud account, but I can't really store anything there. And so people were working out hacks to try to be able to store files on there the way they wanted to store them on, not the way Apple did. And Apple finally capitulated a little bit, and it's a little more like Dropbox. But that was what everybody's experience was with, and that's what they wanted. So I'm hopeful that Dropbox will see some success and continue to be out there. I think they're good competition for Apple in the cloud storage area. We haven't seen any security breaches for quite some time. I think they got stung a couple times a few years ago, and that, if they had any sense, that scared them. And as a result, we haven't seen anything so far yet. So I think they've got a good chance.
Yeah. So again, when I think about stock for investment, I'm really, really, really picky in terms of wanting the very best in terms of company and its growth and profitability. Dropbox certainly has a wonderful service. As we're talking, I remember being a beta customer in maybe 07 or fall of 07 or early 08. So I've used them. I've seen them grow. I mean, they have a really great service, but that doesn't translate into being a really great business because looking at that market, which I spent a number of years consulting in that business. You had Box, who's trying to targeting enterprises. Dropbox was targeting consumers, and they grew virally very rapidly because, they had a, refer a friend type of program. And, if you refer a friend, you get a bonus 500 megabytes or gigabyte or whatever. So, their user base expanded, dramatically. Then they realized, they need, other security controls and other things in order to share. And reading their S1, it seems like, okay, this is this has the benefit of hindsight. This is not the story that they started out with, but they've matured and as they've discovered a paying market for themselves. So, what's their fate? It's very interesting. They have quite an incredible bonus program if their shares hit 20, 25, 30, 35, all the way up to $60. Their CEO could make on the order of $150 million a year, if they hit those milestones. So they're certainly incenting, the board, is certainly incenting the management team, to make this a long-term growth and success story. So I wish them luck, but, trust but verify. Let's see how they actually do. If not, I think they make a great acquisition for somebody like a Microsoft or an Apple.
Mark, I always enjoy our discussions on camera and off because you come at the tech world from the business side, and you always give us a different angle and a different look, a little bit different way to think about it. We all get a little absorbed, I think, in our own world of this is what Dropbox does, and boy, they do it great, and so they must be a great company. And that may not always be the case with a lot of companies, and we've talked about a number of them here, and so. Yeah, time will tell, but I like the way you ended it. Trust but verify.
That's what you need to do.
Yeah. So when you're not here, where can folks find you or how do they get in touch with you?
So I'm planning to write up my analysis of the Apple iPhone shares, so I'll post that on LinkedIn. So that's one place. The other place is on Twitter. My handle's at Mark Fuccio, MarkFuccio, all lowercase, one word.
Great. Mark, thanks for being here, and thanks for participating in the Facebook Live experiment, and we'll do it again soon.
I look forward to seeing how it worked out and what the results and conclusions are.
Me too.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Again, we've been recording this for Facebook Live, so this is a bit of an experiment. We'd love to hear from you about what you thought about it, whether you were watching live on Facebook, and the odds are you probably weren't, simply because we didn't announce it. This was absolutely an experiment. But if you like it, we'll try to do more and definitely give you a little more notice of it. So until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our MacVoices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple Tech with MacVoices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep MacVoices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.